Jake was walking home late that night. The city was quiet, but he never let his guard down. Years as a cop had taught him danger could come from anywhere. The streetlights flickered above him, and a cold breeze rushed through the alleyways. As he passed by a narrow alley, he heard the sound, sharp, fast footsteps, a thud, and then a cry for help. Without thinking, Jake turned and rushed toward the sound. In the dim light, he saw two men struggling with a woman. She was fighting back, but she was small and they were too strong. One of the men raised a hand to strike her. Jake moved fast. His instincts took over. He slammed one man against the wall and punched the other hard in the jaw. The attackers weren't expecting a fight. They tried to fight back, but Jake was faster, stronger, and angrier. Within moments, both men were running, disappearing into the shadows. Jake turned to the woman. She was sitting on the ground, shaking. Her clothes were torn, her lip bleeding slightly. She looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes. He knelt down, holding out his hand. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She nodded slowly but didn't speak. Her hand trembled as she reached for his. "You're safe now," he said. He helped her to her feet. She winced in pain. Jake could see bruises already forming on her arms. He didn't want to leave her alone out here, not in the state she was in. She was clearly in shock, and he couldn't just walk away. "My place isn't far. You can clean up there," he offered. She hesitated, then gave a small nod. She still hadn't said a word. He walked beside her quietly, keeping an eye out for anyone else. When they reached his apartment, he gave her a towel and a first aid kit. She cleaned the cut on her lip in silence while he brewed some coffee. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Jake nodded. "What's your name?" "Emily," she said. He waited for her to say more, but she didn't. He didn't push. He had seen enough trauma to know when someone needed time. Till something about her felt off. She was scared, yes, but there was something else. A sharpness in her eyes, maybe. He couldn't tell. "Do you want to call someone?" he asked. She shook her head. "No one." "No family?" "No." Jake let it go. She stayed the night on the couch. He gave her a blanket and tried to sleep, but something kept him awake. He didn't know this woman. She had no ID, no phone, and no clear story. But there was something about her, something that made him want to protect her. The next morning, she was already up. She had cleaned the kitchen and made coffee. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'll go," she said. "You've done enough." Jake frowned. "Where will you go?" She shrugged. "You can stay. Just for a little while. Until you figure things out." She looked surprised, then nodded. Over the next few days, Jake tried to learn more about her. She was polite, quiet, and always helped around the apartment. But she never talked about herself. When he asked, she changed the subject. She had nightmares, too. He heard her crying in her sleep. Once he tried to comfort her, but she pulled away, terrified. Jake couldn't stop thinking about her. He felt something he hadn't felt in years. Since leaving the force, he had kept to himself, stayed away from people. But Emily was different. She was wounded, yes, but there was strength in her too. And he wanted to know more. Till he had doubts. One night, while she was sleeping, he checked the name she had given. There was no record. No Emily with her description, no missing persons report, nothing. That set off alarms in his mind. He started watching more closely. Emily would disappear for hours without telling him where she went. She always came back with some excuse, walking, thinking, clearing her head. But it didn't sit right. Then the break-in happened. Jake returned home one evening to find the door slightly open. Inside, things were moved, but nothing was stolen. Emily sat on the couch, calm, too calm. "What happened?" he asked. "Someone tried to break in," she said. "I scared them off." He stared at her. Did you call the police? She shook her head. Didn't see the point. That night, he checked his phone and found something strange. It had been accessed remotely. Someone had tried to trace his calls. He hadn't used the phone much lately, no one called him anymore, but the breach felt personal. The next day, Emily was gone again for hours. Jake followed her. She moved through the city like someone who knew how to stay invisible. She met a man in a suit, spoke to him briefly, then walked away. Jake confronted her when she got home. Who was that man? Emily looked at him, her face pale. No one. I saw you. I followed you. You're lying to me. She didn't speak. Jake walked to her room, opened her bag, and found what he didn't expect: photos of him, taken from across the street weeks before they met. Notes about his habits, his background, his life. He turned to her slowly. You were watching me before that night. She nodded once, slowly. Jake's heart pounded. Why? Emily sat down. For the first time, she looked defeated. I didn't mean to hurt you. Then tell me the truth. I was sent to get close to you. I work for a private group. They knew you had something they wanted. Jake's voice was cold. What? Information. From one of your old cases. A hard drive. I don't know what's on it, only that it matters. You faked the attack. No, she said quickly. That part was real. I was followed. But I didn't expect you to save me. I didn't expect to feel anything. He stared at her. Get out. Emily packed her things and left without another word. Jake spent the next 2 days trying to forget. He locked everything down, checked all his files, moved the hard drive to a safe place. He tried to pretend none of it had happened. But he couldn't. Her face stayed in his mind, the sound of her voice, the fear in her eyes that didn't seem fake. Then she came back. He opened the door and there she was, eyes red, hair wet from the rain. They're coming for you now, she said. I tried to stop them, but I can't. Jake didn't let her in. I don't believe you. I fell for you, she whispered. I didn't plan to. I was supposed to lie, but I couldn't anymore. You expect me to trust you after everything? No, she said. But I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help you live. There was something in her voice, something that made him pause. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, like she meant every word. Maybe it was the truth in her fear. He let her in. That night, men came to his apartment. But Jake and Emily were ready. Together, they fought back. Jake had his old instincts. Emily had training he never guessed. They worked as a team. The danger was real, but they escaped, barely. They went on the run after that. Jake gave up his old life, and Emily left her past behind. They had no one but each other. The road was hard, full of danger and doubt, but they stayed together. She had been the danger once. Now she was his only safety. And in the strange, quiet moments between fear and flight, Jake realized something. He loved her. Even if it had all started with a lie. Jake had always kept his home simple. Clean lines, quiet colors, a space where everything had its place. After years on the force, he liked silence, liked knowing he was alone. But tonight was different. The young woman he had rescued, Emily, sat quietly on the edge of his worn leather couch. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes wandered the room like she was trying to memorize every detail, or maybe trying to make sure she could trust it. She had barely spoken since he brought her here. He had offered her tea, given her a towel, even handed her one of his old sweatshirts to wear, since her dress was torn from the attack. She had accepted everything with quiet thanks but no explanation. Jake leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, studying her. She looked fragile, like she might break if he said the wrong thing. But there was also something about her that didn't fit, something that didn't match the helpless image. You can stay here tonight, he said finally, breaking the silence. If you want. I've got a spare room. She looked up at him, and for the first time there was emotion in her eyes, something like gratitude, maybe relief. She nodded. I don't have anywhere else to go, she said softly. Her voice was calm, but he didn't miss the tremble underneath. All right, Jake said, motioning toward the hallway. Bathrooms on the left. You can shower if you need. I'll leave some clothes outside the door. She stood up, moving slowly, like she hadn't fully recovered from what happened. As she walked past him, Jake noticed again how carefully she carried herself. Not like a victim, but like someone used to being cautious. Later, after she had showered and gone to bed, Jake sat alone in the living room, staring at the quiet walls. He wasn't sure why he'd let her in. He wasn't the type to bring strangers home. But something about her had pulled at him. Maybe it was the way she hadn't cried, hadn't screamed. Just the quiet panic in her eyes, and the way she had clung to his arm when he saved her. She was scared. But she was hiding something. He could feel it. The next morning, she was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He hadn't heard her get up. I hope it was okay, she said, holding up the cup. I found it in the cabinet. Jake nodded. Of course. She smiled faintly. Her hair was still damp, and she wore one of his t-shirts with the sleeves rolled up. Thank you for letting me stay, she said. You don't have to thank me. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Jake didn't know how to ask the questions on his mind. Who was she? Why had she been in that alley? Why hadn't she gone to the police? Are you hungry? He asked instead. She shook her head. Not really. He poured himself some coffee and sat across from her. For a while they just sat, two strangers sharing a quiet morning. Over the next few days, Jake let her stay. She didn't ask for anything, but she never tried to leave. She cleaned the kitchen, folded the laundry without being asked, and once even made dinner. When he asked her about herself, she gave short answers. She had no family nearby. No job. No ID. No phone. She told him her name was Emily, but even that seemed like something she wasn't fully sure she should share. Till she was polite. Kind. Quiet. There were moments when she seemed to relax, like when they watched old movies together or when she caught him laughing at one of her clumsy attempts to cook. She smiled more now. Her laugh was soft, hesitant, like it had been locked away for a long time. Jake found himself looking forward to seeing her every morning. Her presence filled the house in a way he hadn't expected. He hadn't realized how lonely he'd been until someone else was there. But the feeling that she was hiding something never went away. One night, he woke up to find her standing in the kitchen, staring out the window. Can't sleep, he asked. She jumped a little, then turned toward him. Sorry. I didn't mean to wake you. It's fine. She hugged her arms around herself. Sometimes I just think too much. Jake nodded, walking over to stand beside her. You're safe here, he said. I know, she replied, though she didn't sound sure. He glanced at her. In the dim light, her face looked tired, older than her years. There were shadows under her eyes and a kind of weight in her expression that didn't belong on someone so young. I'm not going to ask questions you don't want to answer, Jake said carefully. But if you ever feel like talking, I'll listen. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Her lips parted like she might say something, but then she looked away. Thank you, she said softly. Jake felt something stir in his chest. It had been a long time since he'd let anyone in, even a little. He told himself she was just someone who needed help. But he couldn't deny the way her eyes lingered on him, or the way she smiled when he handed her a cup of coffee in the morning. He was starting to care. And that scared him. One afternoon, they sat together on the couch. A movie played in the background, but neither of them was really watching. Jake turned to say something, but stopped. Emily had fallen asleep beside him, her head resting gently against his shoulder. She looked peaceful for once, the tension gone from her face. He didn't move. He just sat there, letting the quiet moments settle around them. Something in him softened, something that hadn't felt warmth in a long time. He didn't know who she really was. He didn't know what had brought her into his life or what secret she was still hiding. But for now she was here. And so was he. And for the first time in years, Jake didn't feel alone. Jake sat alone in his small study, the soft glow of the desk lamp casting shadows across the room. His laptop was open in front of him, displaying a search page with her name, Emily Hart, age unknown, no address, no history. He had searched public records, social media, anything that could tell him who she really was. But there was nothing. No matches. No trace. It was like she didn't exist. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. He didn't want to doubt her. He didn't want to believe that the woman who now made coffee in his kitchen every morning and folded his laundry with gentle hands could be lying to him. But the more time passed, the less things made sense. She was careful, always. Too careful. She never used the front window. She never went outside without looking both ways 3 times. She never even touched his phone. And then there was the night he came home late from the store and found her gone. He had only stepped out for 20 minutes. When he returned, the door was unlocked, the living room light on, but Emily was nowhere in sight. He called out. No answer. Her jacket was gone, so was the pair of sneakers she'd been wearing lately. His heart pounded as he checked every room, every corner. The apartment was untouched. No sign of a struggle. Just quiet. An hour passed before she came back. He opened the door just as she reached it. Her hair was windblown, her cheeks flushed. She froze when she saw him. "Where were you?" he asked, not bothering to hide the edge in his voice. "I just needed air," she said quickly. "A walk? I didn't think you'd be back so soon. You didn't leave a note. You didn't answer your phone. I didn't bring it." Jake stepped aside, letting her in. He didn't want to argue. Not yet. But the questions had started piling up, and he couldn't ignore them anymore. A few days later, something else happened. Jake received a call from an old friend, someone still on the force. It was a casual conversation until the friend asked a strange question. "Hey man, is everything all right? I got a ping. Someone tried to access your case files last night. Your old login. You sure you didn't try logging in from a different device?" Jake frowned. "No. I haven't touched that system in months. You might want to check your home network. Just in case." That night, Jake checked his phone settings. Something was wrong. His call history had been accessed remotely. Messages had been opened that he hadn't read yet. Someone had tapped into his phone, and whoever it was knew what they were looking for. The only person in the apartment besides him was Emily. Jake said nothing. He watched her closely. She acted normal, smiled the same way, spoke softly, moved through the apartment like she always did. But he started noticing things. Her bag never left her side. She always knew where his keys were. And sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, she would glance over at his desk drawer, the one that still held pieces of his past life. The final straw came the night he found the apartment door slightly open. He had gone down to the mailbox. Took less than 5 minutes. But when he came back, the door was unlocked and the living room lights were off. Emily sat in the dark on the couch, completely still. "Why is the door open?" he asked. She looked up, startled. "I don't know. I thought you locked it." Jake stepped inside, scanning the room. His instincts were sharp. Something had been moved, papers on his desk, the drawer just slightly ajar. "Did you go through my desk?" he asked. Her eyes flickered. No. He didn't believe her. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Emily slept soundly in the other room, or at least pretended to. He didn't know what she was hiding, but he was sure of one thing now: Emily had secrets. Dangerous ones. The next morning, he ran a deeper background search. He used connections he hadn't called in years. The result was the same. Emily Hart did not exist. No birth record, no school history, no medical files, nothing. It was like the name was made up. He looked at her differently after that. Not with hatred. Not even with anger. But with caution. The girl he had saved that night in the alley was not who she seemed. And no matter how much he wanted to believe she was just a victim of something terrible, the evidence was stacking up against her. She was not just running from something. She was running towards something, too. And Jake was starting to fear he might be standing in her way. Jake had always trusted his gut. Years on the force had sharpened his instincts to the point where he could smell a lie the second it was spoken. But when it came to Emily, things felt different. His gut was confused, pulling in two directions. One part of him still wanted to protect her, to believe in her innocence. The other part whispered that there was more, something deeper, something she wasn't telling him. Tension in the apartment was heavy. It had been days since the strange break-in and the tapped phone. Jake had watched her closely, trying to catch something, anything, that would explain who she really was. But Emily remained the same on the surface. She smiled gently when he handed her a mug of coffee. She folded blankets neatly on the couch. She even hummed sometimes when she thought she was alone. But Jake had reached his limit. That evening, he came home early. The sun was just beginning to set, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Emily was sitting by the window, her eyes distant, her hands wrapped around a warm cup. She looked peaceful. But Jake knew better. He didn't bother with small talk. "I want the truth," he said. Emily looked up slowly. Her face didn't show surprise. It was like she'd been waiting for this moment. "I don't know what you mean," she said softly. Jake stepped closer. "You know exactly what I mean. No one by your name exists. You disappear for hours without explanation. My phone was tapped. Someone broke in here while you were alone and you acted like nothing happened. Who are you really, Emily?" For a moment, she said nothing. She just stared at him with wide, unreadable eyes. Then she put the cup down, stood up, and walked to the other side of the room like she needed space to think. "I didn't want to lie," she said finally. Her voice was trembling. "But I had no choice." Jake crossed his arms, waiting. "My real name isn't Emily Hart," she continued. "I had to change it after I escaped." "Escaped from what?" he asked. She hesitated. "From a man. Someone dangerous. Controlling. He kept me like a prisoner for years. I was young when I met him, too young to know better. He said he loved me, but he didn't. He watched everything I did. Took away my phone, my freedom, everything. When I finally found a way to run, I didn't look back." Jake watched her face as she spoke. Pain in her voice seemed real. Too real to fake. "I came here to disappear," she said, eyes shining with unshed tears. "I didn't expect anyone to save me that night. I didn't plan it. You were just there." He wanted to believe her. Her voice cracked with emotion, her hands shook, and for a moment she looked exactly like the terrified girl he had rescued in the alley. Vulnerable. Afraid. Real. But something still didn't add up. "If you were running," he said slowly, "why did you have no ID? No backup plan? You've been careful but not smart. That man, whoever he is, you never even told me his name." Emily wiped at her eyes, then shook her head. "Because saying his name out loud makes it real. If I say it, it's like I'm calling him back." Jake stared at her, heart heavy. He hated seeing her like this, broken, scared. But he still couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That night, when she went to bed, he opened her bag. He didn't want to do it, but he had to know. The bag was tucked carefully under her bed. He brought it into the living room, set it down on the table, and opened it slowly. Inside there were the usual things: a small change of clothes, a hairbrush, a tube of lipstick worn almost to the bottom. But beneath a folded scarf was something that made his breath catch in his throat. A small envelope. Inside it, photos of him. Jake stared at the images, his hands tightening around the edges. There were at least 6 pictures. One of him walking to his car. One standing outside a grocery store. One through the window of a coffee shop, reading a newspaper. And worst of all, one of him inside his own apartment, seen through the window, cooking dinner. The photos were weeks old. All taken before the night he found her in the alley. He dropped the envelope and sat back in shock. His heart pounded like a drum. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was fact. She had been watching him long before he ever met her. Jake stayed up all night. He couldn't sleep, couldn't think. Every word she'd ever said replayed in his mind. Every smile, every laugh. Was any of it real? When morning came, he didn't speak to her. She noticed. Her eyes followed him around the room, her face tight with worry. "Jake," she asked, "are you okay?" He didn't answer. He didn't trust himself to speak yet. It wasn't until later that day, when she stepped out to take a walk, that he finally picked up the photos again. He stared at them, trying to make sense of everything. He needed answers. And now, he wasn't going to wait for her to give them willingly. When she returned, he was sitting at the table with the photos spread out. Her face went pale. "You've been following me," Jake said, his voice low. "Before we ever met. Before I found you in that alley." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was no use pretending now. "Why?" he demanded. "Why were you watching me?" Emily sank into the chair across from him. She looked like someone who had just stopped running after miles of fleeing. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this," she whispered. "But yes, I was watching you. I had to." "Why?" he asked again, harsher this time. She met his eyes. "Because he told me to." Jake froze. "I didn't know who you were at first," she said. "Only that you used to be a cop. He wanted to know if you were digging into him. If you were still working unofficially. He said you might be a threat. He told me to follow you, to learn your habits. I didn't want to, but I had no choice." Jake's jaw tightened. "And then what? You were going to report back to him?" "I did. First," she said, her voice cracking. "But after a while I stopped. I started seeing you as a person, not a target. I watched you help an old man cross the street. I watched you feed a stray dog. You weren't like him. You weren't cruel. You were good. I knew I couldn't keep lying. So I staged that night. The alley. I let him think I was attacked. But I just wanted out. I knew if I let you save me, maybe you'd protect me." Jake stared at her, stunned. His mind reeled. "I didn't plan on falling for you," she said. "But I did." He didn't speak. He didn't move. Emily reached across the table, but he pulled away. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he said. She nodded slowly, tears falling from her eyes. "I understand." The room was silent. Jake stood up and walked away, needing time to breathe, to think. He had saved her. But now he knew she had been the danger all along. Jake sat alone in the kitchen, the photos still spread across the table. Morning light streamed in through the window, but it felt cold, distant. The air in the apartment was heavy with silence. Emily hadn't said a word since their last conversation. She stayed in the bedroom most of the time, barely moving, barely breathing. But Jake's mind couldn't stop racing. He had gone through every moment from the night he met her. The dark alley, the bruises, the tears. He had believed it all. Every lie she told had landed exactly where it needed to, right in the part of him that still wanted to help someone, to protect the weak, to be useful again. She had played him perfectly. And it made him sick. He didn't want to believe it. He still didn't want to believe it. But something inside him had finally shifted. The man he used to be, the detective who looked at evidence instead of emotions, had woken up. He started digging again. Not just into the name Emily Hart, but into something deeper. He reached out to old contacts, people who owed him favors or still respected his name. And after a few hours, one of them came through. "She's not who she says she is," his friend on the other end of the call said. "Goes by different names. Seen her pop up in a few private files, off-the-grid stuff. She's connected to something big, Jake. Not a runaway. Not a victim. Trained. Smart. Operates under deep cover. Word is, she works for a group nobody wants to talk about. Not even in whispers." Jake leaned against the counter, gripping his phone tightly. What kind of group? Shadow stuff. Not officially government. Not exactly private either. They clean things up, discreetly. People who ask too many questions, people who know too much. Sound familiar? Jake felt like the air had been knocked from his chest. His voice was low. "She was sent for me." "Looks like it." Call ended, but Jake stood there for a long time, unmoving. Something he thought he had buried deep inside him was now burning again. Betrayal. She had watched him, followed him, gained his trust. And now he knew why. There was one more thing he had to check. He went to the back of his closet, where an old metal box sat hidden under dusty coats and unopened boxes. He hadn't touched it in years. Inside were the pieces of a case that had ended his career, notes, evidence photos, names he had never stopped thinking about. The case that had gotten too close to powerful people. The case he had been told to walk away from. But he never had. Not really. He opened the box. The files were there, untouched. But one item was missing. A small flash drive. Jake's heart pounded as he turned the apartment upside down looking for it. Every drawer, every cabinet. Nothing. He walked into the bedroom. Emily was sitting on the bed, her eyes red, her posture tense. She looked at him but didn't speak. "Where is it?" Jake asked. She didn't pretend to be confused. "I had to take it," she said quietly. "I didn't want to, but it was the job." Jake laughed bitterly. "So it was all a job? Everything? From the alley to the tears to the nights on the couch watching old movies, you were just playing me?" "No," she said quickly. "At first, yes. It was the mission. But after a while, after I saw who you were, I didn't want to do it anymore." "Then why did you?" he snapped. "Because they would have sent someone else if I didn't. Someone worse. Someone who wouldn't hesitate. I thought if I got close, maybe I could protect you." Jake shook his head. "You drugged me that night, didn't you? When I passed out on the couch. You went through the files." Emily didn't answer. She didn't need to. Jake's hands were shaking. Anger and hurt twisted in his chest like a storm. "I trusted you," he said. "I let you into my home. I let you into my life. And you used that to rob me." "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. "But you did," he said, his voice sharp now. "You knew exactly what you were doing. And you still did it." He stepped back, his eyes cold now. "Get out." Emily blinked, her mouth parting as if she hadn't heard him right. "What?" "You heard me. Pack your things. Get out. Now." She stood up slowly. "Jake, please." "No," he said firmly. "You don't get to explain anymore. I gave you a chance to tell me the truth, and you gave me a lie wrapped in tears. I don't care what you feel now. You betrayed me." Tears streamed down her face, but Jake didn't flinch. She grabbed her bag and started packing. The silence was unbearable. Felt like the end of something that had never been real in the first place. When she was done, she stood at the door, looking back at him one last time. I'm sorry, she said softly. More than you know. Jake didn't answer. He couldn't. If he did, something inside him might break completely. She walked out. The door clicked shut behind her. Jake stood there, staring at the space where she had been. The room was quiet again. Empty. But he knew things would never go back to the way they were. He walked over to the window and pulled the curtain aside, watching as she disappeared down the street. Part of him wanted to chase her. Part of him wanted to believe that she had meant some of it, that somewhere deep inside her, the person she pretended to be was real. But he couldn't afford that hope. He turned away from the window and walked back to the table. Photos were still there. The memories, the lies, the manipulation, it was all laid out before him like a puzzle he should have solved earlier. Jake picked up one of the pictures and stared at it. His own face, unaware, trusting the world around him. He didn't recognize that version of himself anymore. He dropped the photo and sat down, his hands resting on the table. He felt tired. Not just from the sleepless nights or the betrayal, but from something deeper. The truth had cost him more than he expected. But at least now he knew it. Emily had not come into his life by accident. She had been sent. She had smiled, cried, pretended, and she had taken what she came for. Jake was no fool. He knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. It had been 3 days since Jake threw her out. 3 long days filled with silence, anger, and confusion. He tried to go about his routine, coffee in the morning, reading the news, cleaning up the mess she left behind, but nothing felt right. The apartment felt hollow without her. Every corner reminded him of her laughter, her voice, the way she used to curl up with a blanket and pretend like she belonged there. And for a while she had. Or so he believed. Kept thinking about the photos, the flash drive, her lies. But at the same time, her eyes haunted him. They had looked real. Tears had felt real. And even though everything in his mind screamed betrayal, his heart wasn't so sure. That night, he couldn't sleep again. Rain tapped lightly on the windows, and the city outside felt quiet, too quiet. Jake sat on the couch, staring at nothing, lost in thought. Then someone knocked on the door. It was soft, but insistent. He reached for his gun out of instinct and walked cautiously to the door. He looked through the peephole and froze. It was her. Emily stood outside, soaked from the rain, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes wide and unsure. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just waited. Jake's heart thundered in his chest. He opened the door slowly, keeping his voice cold. "What are you doing here?" "I had nowhere else to go," she said quietly. "But that's not why I'm here." "You think I'm going to let you in after what you did?" he asked. She nodded. "I know you have every reason to hate me. But please just give me 5 minutes." Jake stared at her, then stepped aside. She walked in slowly, dripping water onto the floor, looking around the room like it had changed. Maybe it had. Maybe they both had. She stood in the middle of the living room, shivering slightly. "I was followed," she said. "They know I failed. They think I turned on them. They're coming after me and after you." Jake didn't respond right away. He didn't trust her. Not even a little. But something about her tone made his stomach twist. She wasn't just scared, she was desperate. "I thought you were one of them," he said finally. "I was," she admitted. "But it was never supposed to go this far." Jake narrowed his eyes. "So what changed? You got a conscience?" "No," she whispered. "I fell in love with you." Silence filled the room. Jake took a step back, trying to process the weight of her words. He had imagined her saying that once, when things had been good. But now it sounded like a trick. A weapon. "I know what you're thinking," she said. "But I'm not lying. Not this time. Why should I believe you?" She walked over to the table and slowly unzipped a hidden pocket in her coat. She pulled out the flash drive she had stolen and placed it on the table. I'm giving it back. Jake stared at it. He didn't move. They wanted it badly, she continued. It has information that could destroy some powerful people. That case you were working on, it wasn't just sensitive, it was explosive. The group I worked for, they clean up problems. And you were one of them. That's why I was sent. I was supposed to silence you, or at least steal the evidence. I chose the second option. But I couldn't do the rest. I couldn't hurt you. Jake walked over and picked up the flash drive, his fingers curling around it tightly. Felt heavier than it had 3 days ago. So what now? He asked. They're going to come, she said. Not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And when they do, they won't ask questions. They'll assume we're working together now. That I flipped. And they don't leave loose ends. Jake looked at her. Her eyes weren't pleading this time. They were steady. Focused. Then you should run, he said. I would, she replied. But if I run, they'll still come for you. You're not safe anymore. Not unless you disappear, too. Or we fight back. Jake chuckled bitterly. You want me to fight a covert group with you? I know it sounds crazy, she said. But I've seen what they can do. I know how they operate. I know their weaknesses. With your skills and my knowledge, we have a chance. He studied her for a long moment. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't lying, at least he didn't think she was. There was something different about her now. A resolve he hadn't seen before. And if this is another trick, he asked. It's not. Jake looked at the flash drive again. Everything he had worked on, everything he had fought for, was now back in his hands. But he was also holding something else, an opportunity. A second chance. Maybe even redemption. He sighed and sat down, rubbing his face with both hands. You broke into my life, stole from me, lied to me, used me. And now you want me to trust you. Yes, she said simply. Jake looked up at her. You've got nerve. I've got something else too, she replied. Loyalty. Now anyway. There was a pause, thick and heavy. Finally, Jake nodded once. Fine. But we do this my way. No more secrets. She nodded, relief washing over her face. No more secrets, she said. For the next few hours, they sat together going over everything she knew. Names, locations, protocols. Jake took notes, asked questions, listened carefully. His detective instincts were on high alert. But with every answer, every honest glance, he felt his anger begin to shift. Not disappear, but shift. He couldn't ignore the fact that she was risking everything now. Whatever she had felt before, whether it was real or not, she had made a choice. And she chose him. By midnight, they had a plan. It wasn't perfect. It was risky, dangerous, and depended on a lot of unknowns. But it was all they had. As they finished reviewing the map on the table, Jake looked at her. She looked tired but alive. Ready. Why me? He asked suddenly. She turned to him. What do you mean? There are hundreds of detectives. Why did they send you after me? She hesitated. Because you were the only one who didn't stop asking questions. You kept digging even after they shut the case down. You weren't afraid. They knew you'd be a problem eventually. He nodded slowly. Made sense. It always had. But hearing it confirmed made it feel final. And you, he asked. Why did you fall for me? She smiled faintly. Because you saw me. Not as a mission. Not as a tool. You saw a person. No one's done that in a long time. Jake looked at her for a long moment. Chemistry was still there, still crackling beneath the surface. But now it was wrapped in danger, in mistrust, in history. He didn't know what would happen next. But he knew one thing for certain. They were in it together now. And the storm was coming. The sun hadn't risen yet, but Jake was already awake, dressed in black and packing the last of their supplies. The safe house they had been using for the past 2 days was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. Emily was in the next room, checking the weapons and gear. They hadn't slept much. Sleep was a luxury people on the run couldn't afford. Jake moved silently through the small cabin, double-checking every exit, every blind spot. He'd set up traps, alarms, anything to give them even a few seconds warning. 'Cause today wasn't about hiding. Today was about fighting back. Emily appeared in the doorway, her eyes tired but sharp. "It's time." Jake nodded. There was no fear left in either of them now. Only focus. They left the cabin and drove through the forest on an old dirt road, deep into the woods until the trees gave way to an abandoned airstrip. That was where the group had set up their field operation, a temporary base, heavily guarded but not impenetrable. They knew the risks. Jake had been a cop. Emily had been trained by people who erased lives like sweeping dust from a table. But together they had something the group didn't expect: purpose. Not just survival but justice. Closure. And yes, something even deeper. Love, twisted and unlikely as it was. They parked the car in a hidden spot and moved on foot, communicating with hand signals. Emily led them to a gap in the perimeter, something she had learned from her time on the inside. The group was efficient but not perfect. She knew their blind spots. Jake followed her lead, his body tense but steady. He trusted her now, not completely but enough. They slipped into the compound just as the sun began to rise, creeping behind low-hanging clouds. The guards were changing shifts. Timing was everything. Jake took out the first guard with a silent takedown, dragging him into the shadows. Emily disabled the security panel on the outer building, her fingers moving fast, familiar. In minutes, they were inside. Their target was a secure room that held the hard drive with the names of everyone connected to the organization: operatives, handlers, politicians, businessmen. It was the only leverage they had, the only thing that could bring the group down or at least scatter them for long enough to disappear. They moved quickly, navigating the narrow halls, dodging cameras, avoiding contact. But nothing ever goes exactly as planned. The alarm triggered. Jake cursed under his breath. "They know." Emily nodded. "We've got maybe 2 minutes." They ran. The secure room was just ahead. Jake kicked the door in and Emily dove toward the server rack, pulling the hard drive and slipping it into her bag. Gunfire erupted behind them. Jake fired back, covering her as they sprinted through a side corridor. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. This was the moment everything had led to, every lie, every kiss, every silent night watching the shadows. They reached the exit, but more guards poured in from the side. Trapped. Emily reached into her coat and tossed a smoke grenade, filling the hallway with thick gray fog. They bolted through the side door, bullets slicing the air around them. Jake was hit in the shoulder, but he kept moving. They made it to the car, peeled out onto the dirt road, and didn't look back. Hours passed before they stopped, far from the airstrip, in an abandoned gas station off a forgotten highway. Jake leaned against the car, blood seeping through his shirt. "Let me see," Emily said, pulling out the first aid kit. Jake winced as she cleaned the wound and wrapped it. "You're lucky," she said. "It went through clean." He looked at her, his voice rough. "We got it." She nodded. "Everything we need to bring them down." He looked away for a moment. "Then why don't I feel like we won?" "Because we didn't," she said. "Not yet." She stood and walked a few steps away, looking out at the empty road. Jake watched her. Even now, with everything they'd been through, she still looked like a mystery. But one he couldn't stop thinking about. He stood, his shoulder aching, and walked up behind her. "You know we can't go back," he said. She nodded. "I know. They'll keep coming." "I know." He turned her gently to face him. "Then what do we do?" She looked into his eyes, her voice soft. We run. We disappear. Together. Jake should have argued. He should have reminded her how dangerous it was, how unpredictable, how crazy. But instead, he reached up and touched her cheek. I never wanted this, he said. Any of it. Me neither, she replied. And then they kissed. Not like before, not with doubt or pain or guilt, but with something fierce. Something true. They drove through the night, changing cars twice, ditching phones, covering their tracks. By the time the sun rose again, they were in a new state with new identities and no clear destination. But they were together. Jake still had questions, still had scars. But now he had something else too. Someone who had once been his enemy, now standing beside him as an equal, a partner. Emily still lived with the weight of her choices. She still carried secrets. But for the first time in her life, she had someone who saw her, not as a tool, not as a threat, but as a person. They found a small cabin by a lake, far from any town. It wasn't much, but it was quiet. Safe. For now. Jake sat on the porch, watching the sunset, a cup of coffee in his hand. Emily joined him, wrapping a blanket around them both. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. They had lost everything, names, homes, futures. But in the ashes of what used to be, they had found something strange and unexpected. Love. Not the kind that starts with flowers or candlelight, but the kind forged in fire and built on truth. They were off the grid, ghosts in a world that wanted them gone. But they were together. And that was enough.